And we're gearing up to welcome both Lieutenant Colonel Erica Mitchell and Doug Fletcher. And I mean, admittedly, when you hear the name Jack Voltaic, I've had a couple of folks ask, well, we don't have that speaker's information. I said, well, no, you understand that it's not a speaker, it's actually a program. So they're coming on and going to talk to us a little bit about what the Army Cyber is doing to build out and continue that hands-on education aspects of learning. And y'all had to shift it a little bit, haven't you, this year, taking it virtual? So
that's correct. Yes, thank you.
yeah,
I am Lieutenant Colonel Doug Fletcher, and I'm here at our senior research scientist at the Army Cyber Institute. I'm an Army Operations Research System Analyst, and I'm working here on the Jack Voltaic Research Project. And I'm here with Lieutenant Colonel Erica Mitchell. She and I have been here at the Army Cyber Institute since the summer of 2018, and she has been working with the Jack Voltaic project since her arrival here, and I've been working on Jack Voltaic, in particular Jack Voltaic 3. And so, you know, the big question is, what is Jack Voltaic? And really, Jack Voltaic is a research event that we focus at the city level. And we investigate critical infrastructure resilience, information sharing, and public-private partnerships. We facilitate this research through a scenario-based exercise event that has cyber attacks which directly and indirectly impact the city and their critical infrastructure. And it requires a coordinating response from both the public and our private partners. There's three key components that we use in Jack Voltaic. We have a tabletop exercise, and what's important here is it includes both operational and IT personnel leadership as participants. As they present this increasingly complex scenario to the participants, it forces them to collaborate and work through the decision process to determine the reaction to the scenario, but also to determine, hey, what are some of the gaps and interdependencies that exist here? Another component is a cyber range, and this is really where we're exercising the IT administrator and users, and it's also there to help feed injects into the tabletop exercise, and really try to reinforce the connection between what's happening with the IT and what's happening operationally. And then finally, probably the biggest key to all this is a planning committee that ties all this together. They serve as they help with a scenario. These are the stakeholders from each of the cities, and I have to tell you, it's a coalition of the willing. All right, these are participants, planners, the white cell, and researchers, and all of these partnerships are built from the ground up. Unlike an Army exercise where, you know, people can task units to participate, we can't task cities to do this. We have to go out there and we have to work and build that partnership, which takes us, it takes a great deal amount of time, but it's very worthwhile. So the question now, though, is why are we doing this? And really, it comes down to that the DoD and the Army is dependent on the public-private critical infrastructure. I mean, our bases are powered by the grid, our equipment moves via rail to the ports, and our command and control systems leverage the commercial internet structure. Now, while there's been a concerted effort on the DoD to look, you know, within the fort at our post camps and stations, we also recognize that in the current state, we need to increase our awareness outside the wire, or look from fort to port, is what we'll talk about when we talk about JV3. We've been able to really rely on some key planning assumptions that allow us, you know, point toward freedom of movement, freedom of action within the United States. But now it's not that easy anymore, and it's essential for us to better understand the current environment in order to update and revise our planning assumptions. And the other reason. One of the other reasons why we do this is that a lot of exercises tend to focus at the higher levels and are classified. Jack Voltaic is a city-focused event, and it's built from the bottom up. Our objectives for Jack Voltaic are agreed upon with the participants and all the different stakeholders that are involved. And what it allows is, by digging in at the city level, we can look at the problem where the population density and that density of infrastructure creates an environment particularly susceptible to cyber threats that can quickly spread from one network to the next, one sector to the next, and potentially spread from information processing systems to cyber physical systems. Now, before I turn it over to Erica, one last comment. I want to kind of say what Jack Voltaic is not. And it's not solely an IT event. All right, we're not going to conduct a vulnerability assessment of the network's hardware or software. Really what we're looking at is that synergy between the IT and the operational personnel. We want to look at cyber incident response, and we want to look at how they both those facets can work together to improve critical infrastructure resilience. So now I'm going to turn it over to Erica, who's going to give a little bit of the history on Jack Voltaic. Erica.
All right, thanks, Doug. So Jack Voltaic was born in 2016. We had a Judy Escabel that was working at the Army Cyber Institute, and she needed a research project. And so one of the things that she decided to look at was the concept of cyber mutual assistance. So, in the energy industry, you see it all the time. If there's a natural disaster, linemen from all over the country come over and repair things. Just recently, we had some of the remnants of one of the hurricanes that came through in the West Point area, and there were linemen from as far away as Georgia that were here fixing the wires. So if you can do that in the electric industry space, then why can you not do that in cyber? A lot of times, these different critical infrastructure sectors may have similar programmable logic controllers. And so you may have people who have experience with that particular hardware and software that can assist other people. So with that idea, a cyber mutual assistance workshop was held in April 2016. And from there, the idea of Jack Voltaic having an exercise that looks at that mutual assistance and how people can work together to respond to a cyber incident was born. And so JV 1.0 took place in New York City in 2016, and it brought together 25 organizations, 137 participants from 6 different critical infrastructure sectors. And so it looked at a combination of a physical event in a terrorist attack in New York City and a cyber event where you had bad actors using that terrorist attack to target the financial sector especially. And so the research goals for that were to assess the city's cyber response capabilities through a multi-sector exercise, including their intelligence and information sharing, their incident management, and their decision-making authorities and coordination, and then determine whether it's sufficiently integrated with a physical crisis that's happening at the same time, and develop a framework for how a city can respond to these types of attacks. And so after that, there was appetite for another Jack Voltaic. There was a lot of information gathered from that. There was a report that came out of it. And so Houston volunteered to be the subject of Jack Voltaic 2.0. And it also incorporated Beaumont, which is one of the ports where the Army projects forces. So we started tying the Army back into it. The reason New York was selected the first time was just because it was close and it could be done quickly. And with Houston, it was City of Houston as well as Port of Beaumont. And it was a 3-day exercise instead of just the 1-day exercise. And again, the research goals were similar. It was developing a framework in order to exercise the city's ability to respond. Evaluating the cyber resilience of key defense critical infrastructure. So you can see we kind of made the transition from just critical infrastructure in general to critical infrastructure as it affects the DoD. And then evaluating and examining the military's coordination process for providing cyber protection capabilities if requested by civil authorities. That is still an open question that we're working through, but it was part of what was looked at during Jack Voltaic 2.0. And as Doug mentioned, we are very into the cities being equal partners and working with their research goals. The 4th research goal was to showcase the City of Houston as an emerging state and national leader in cyber incident response. And so JV 2.0 took place, and then after that, the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy requested that we do a workshop series called JV 2.5, where we went to 7 different cities, 6 of which were port cities, in order to share the lessons learned from prior JV exercises, but also to learn from those different regions what their cyber resilience posture looked like, and what they could work on, where they needed improvement, but where they were strong. And so the lessons learned out of all of those kind of boil down to 3 big things. There aren't robust cyber frameworks. We also have attended national level tabletop exercises, and what we learn from those is at the national level, when you talk to Department of Energy and DHS, there's a plan. There's always a plan. You've got, a ton of strategic planners that sit around and war game every bad thing that could happen. But by the time you get all the way down to the city level, which is really going to be the ground zero for something that happens, they don't know that plan. They don't know who to talk to about that plan. And a lot of times with cyber incidents, they don't have a really good way of determining whether it's an incident, nor do they have the authority to declare an incident and get all the resources that come with that. And then the second big thing was information sharing. A lot of times people keep things internal to their organization until it absolutely needs to go somewhere else. And in that, you end up with whatever negative act having more and more time to be proliferated while people aren't talking to each other. And so you have a lot of silos of excellence among the ISACs and ISAOs, and those touch points aren't necessarily considered at the time something's occurring. And then we also noticed a need for campaign plans. We need to come up with this grand scale. What do people need to do to reach that level of proficiency, especially at a local level where they may not have the resources, as in time and money, but also in personnel. Usually, there a lot of cyber incidents are considered IT problems, and again, Lieutenant Colonel Fletcher touched on that, but any type of cyber attack is not an IT problem. Preventing may be an IT problem, although I'd argue that's still an operational problem as well. But we need to stop pointing at the IT department and saying, fix this, and looking at the greater operational scale of what happens if there is a cyber incident. How does that affect your bottom line financially and for your business operations? And so if you can stop looking at it as something to look at the CISO or CIO and they're supposed to fix everything, this really should fall into a CEO's lane. It matters for the business. And in our case, for force projection, we've made a lot of assumptions throughout the years that we're always going to be able to project forces from the US and it's not going to be contested. And with cyber, that's no longer a good assumption. And that's where JV has been moving. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Doug because he is the lead for Jack Voltaic 3.0.
Thanks, Erica. And yeah, and Jack Voltaic 3 is the third iteration in the series. And really, what we built off of from Houston, realizing the focus on critical infrastructure that supports DoD is, all right, now let's take a hard look at what could happen what could potentially happen from port to port. All right, and so we're looking at the strategic port cities of Charleston and Savannah and their reaction to a multi-sector cyber attack against their civilian critical infrastructure. In particularly, we're looking at those sectors that support the Army's ability to project forces. And again, our focus is on port to port. That includes everything from the roads and the rails that take the equipment to the port, but also includes, getting the equipment once at the port onto the ship. But we're not really focused on from port to port or, port to foxhole. Why did we pick Charleston and Savannah? Well, both of those cities had a role in the movement of equipment in support of the Army's Defender 2020, which was a force projection exercise that occurred back in the spring. So, we were asked by Army to do this back in January, February of 19, I believe. We began we did our analysis, started working on it, and leveraged JV 2.5 to help our partnership building, and then continued working through and built up to where we were going to execute in April. But that didn't happen. A lot of the uncertainty and the craziness of 2020 with the pandemic forced us to kind of reassess how we were going to do Jack Voltaic. And so really what we ended up doing is we shifted our execution date to September 22nd, 24th. Instead of doing an on-site event, we moved to a virtual event. We also had a scenario set up that was going to be 7 turns occurring over 3 days. And really, we wanted to shift to a single day, single city, virtual execution of the tabletop portion. And we wanted to leverage technology. And so through this, we're partnering with FTI technology, but also with Norwich University Applied Research Institute. And their Decide platform provides us a distributed web-based exercise platform that will allow organizations at multiple levels to kind of exercise the response protocols, coordinate, and leverage some of the decision-making capabilities. What it does for us is it delivers the injects to those participants based on their organization and based on their exercise roles, as well as allows them a communication platform for them to chat or email others within the exercise. We're also going to leverage Microsoft Teams, and we're going to use a concept of similar to kind of like an OODA loop, but we're going to allow the participants time to observe and see what's going on with respect to the injects that they're seeing. But we're also going to give them time to work with their organization. We've established virtual tables through MS Teams that gives the participants an opportunity to discuss what they're seeing with people at the city or people at the state level. And then from there, we'll move to our main table where now the organizations will come and they'll talk about, hey, here's what, through a facilitated discussion, here's how we're reacting to the scenario. And as I said, with the scenario, originally it was 7 turns over a 3-day period. What we ended up doing is we ended up conducting a couple virtual rehearsals to get the participants comfortable with the technology. And our first rehearsal occurred back in August, and it was turns 1 and 2, or 1, 2, and 3. The second rehearsal was earlier this month, and it was turns 3 and 4. And then for actual execution, we'll do it one day with turns 4 through 7. And so really the scenario too, it's not one big event that's stopping everything. What the cities were really interested in looking at is, hey, what is it going to take to get a cyber incident to kind of activate the state EOC? What's it going to take to get a cyber incident to push up through there? So we really wanted to try to kind of take a death by 1,000 cuts approach. And that also allows us to take a good look at some of the potential threats that could impact force projection. What happens if the traffic lights go awry on the roads there on the way to the port? What happens, to the rail if they're having issues with their manifests? So all of this gives us an opportunity to kind of look at the impacts that attacks on the commercial civilian critical infrastructure that they'll have on the Army. And it's really kind of trying to figure out how can people affect the Army without even targeting us directly. So some of the outputs that we're looking to get out of Jack Voltaic 3, we will have a detailed research report that we'll submit that'll discuss kind of what we did, the planning, and our findings from the actual events that we've held. We'll also come out with an exercise manual, and Colonel Mitchell talked about the framework that we're talking about of allowing any city to kind of go in and response their site or practice their cyber incident response. And this exercise manual is going to kind of detail how we did JV3 and can be used as a template for others to try to replicate. And then we've been able to offer a lot of grants to allow some other institutions to do some research with whether it's a fort-to-port disruption tool or some metric developments. We're getting a lot of support with respect to that. But with respect to this framework, I want to turn it back over to Colonel Mitchell and let Erica talk to you kind of the way ahead and what's the future of Jack Voltaic. Erica?
All right. So as Doug mentioned, the framework was part of our research goals. I mentioned it every single Jack Voltaic iteration. We were working on developing this repeatable and scalable framework. And what we learned by going to these different cities is that no two cities are alike. I can't compare what Houston is doing with what San Diego is doing, with what Austin, Texas is doing, because every city is set up differently. Even with Charleston and Savannah, this is our first time kind of looking a little bit more regionally and exercising two cities, within the same geographic area. But there's differences in the way their government structure is set up, even though they're neighboring states, and you would expect more similarities. So what we're looking to do now is do this dynamic framework that's designed for each city, or eventually to be able to scale up to regional, and for them to be able to go in and provide information and do their own planning following the Jack Voltaic framework. So as Doug mentioned, we're working with some grants, and so we've kind of got this wheel of 6 different elements. And so we're looking at assessment, planning, modeling and simulation, execution, analysis, and reporting. And within that circle, we've nested the NIST cybersecurity framework, where identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover are nested within those 6 elements. And then we've also nested the FEMA framework, because a lot of times you're going to see opportunistic attacks when there's a physical event. So we're looking at pre-incident, incident, incident response, stabilization, and recovery. And then all of that kind of goes around our more simplistic Jack Voltaic prepare, prevent, respond, and report. And so, as Doug mentioned, we're looking at the port disruption tool, and that's going to fall under modeling and simulation, where you are looking at how these different events kind of go out from the original location and affect other things. So even during the Savannah and Charleston JV3, we've kind of tried to incorporate some of the models that come from that and see, what a disruption at one port will do to the region and how it may affect other ports. And then what we're looking to build, we're working towards a deadline, fingers crossed, of third quarter FY21 to have this full suite kind of put together. But what we're looking to do is have a user from a municipality able to come in and select, what critical infrastructure partners are involved, what their concerns are, what, natural disasters or physical responses may happen in their region. You're probably not going to have a tornado in Florida, so you're looking more at hurricanes down there. But if they're interested in pairing both a natural event or a physical event with a cyber event, we'd like to have that capability in there. And then from there, it'll kind of give them a base plan as well as timeline. And so what that does for them and for us is, right now we're on about an 18 to 24 month planning cycle anytime we do this, because we're entering into a new arena. And so, the first thing we have to do is find out who the players are. And then we have to establish trust with those players. And it's very difficult, especially the more geographically dispersed they are. So with Savannah and Charleston, we've made several trips in person up until actually March, when all of that was ended. And so, at this point, we're having to go geographically dispersed and online, and part of that has been the Nuari Decide platform, which allows us to conduct these tabletop exercises remotely. And while, it's been kind of a blessing in disguise, because as this builds and we get more and more people involved, eventually, I'd like to see something where multiple cities in different states are hit and it's all part of a single exercise. And so having some of these tools in place is going to allow us to do things like that and be able to look at how resources may flow if you start to have multiple incidents across differing regions, and what all that's going to look like. And I'm going to stop talking now because I'd like to leave at least a few minutes for questions. Are there any questions? Liz, I think you might be muted.
Oh, technology. I mean, talking about education, obviously, this is only the second time I've done that today. You would think with the red light, it would help me remember this. So one of the things, kind of looking forward while we're waiting a reminder, if anyone wants to pop questions in, and I see one coming in, but how are y'all looking towards, are the lessons learned, saying, okay, now that we've done a little bit virtual, are you up in the game changing some of the different, like, okay, this was kind of cool. Let's incorporate that even if we are in person.
So, one of the things that we did is we did something we called Jack Pandemus back in June, and really we were trying to figure out a way, how do we keep our stakeholders engaged? Because there was a time period there where we weren't really sure what was going to happen with JV3, and so Jack Pandemus was a kind of a short 2-hour event that explored a cyber attack against a natural gas line under pandemic conditions. And we got a lot of traction with that, and it was for us to kind of prove a concept of being able to do these distributed. But what it allowed us to kind of see is just add to the repertoire within the Jack Voltaic research. So you can have your standard Jack Voltaic that we saw with 1 and 2, where you have the cyber range that feeds into the tabletop. But then potentially we can do these mini Jack Voltaics that are really focused on certain events, but can get a lot more detailed information to us.
And one of the questions that's come in reminds me of, so when I was with the Atlanta airport, we would offer our, as part of our emergency response, we actually had the whole of a plane, the fuselage, that we would set on fire and have to give warnings of, hey, as we're going to be practicing these different emergency drills, there will be a fire by the airport. It is not an actual plane. We know what's going on. So kind of taking that theme, the question is, if the event is not virtual, would there be a live action training instances going on in physical locales within a city? For example, opportunities to bring in the Corps of Engineers, other civilians, et cetera, to kind of take it to that next level.
So thus far we have not. We have gone as far as having, news anchors do bits, and of course you've got the exercise only across the bottom, so as not to incite panic. But we have had news anchors, make, roll reels that show these bad things are happening across the city. And that was when we were in person. Like JV 2.0 had all of those to kind of make it feel more real without incorporating physical events out and about. It would be possible to do so, but I'm not sure, based on the way our structure is, whether that would add enough training value to justify the expense of setting things on fire or staging protests, and what type of consequences that might have in real life.
No, excellent. And kind of as a follow-on to that, and it will be part of our last question for today, are there sorts of participants, as you're as it gets open up for the exercises, that y'all have noticed a need for, like, you really want to draw in more either experts from this side of industry or from city? Like, are there gaps that you're looking to fill?
Doug, would you like to go first on that one?
So what's great about Jack Voltaic, and really with this distributed approach, we've been able, we right now for JV3, we've got over 8 sectors represented that span different public and private partner or public and private industry. Whether it's the city of Savannah or city of Charleston, we've got Chubb Insurance, the different waterworks, the different medical facilities. So what really is what we want is we want more more representation. If you may not think that, okay, I don't have anything to do with force projection, but by you coming in, you're basically expanding that network that we're looking at, and we can see, hey, maybe I do need to know that, or maybe I do need to talk to this person. And we see it in the workshops all the time where we have somebody who stands up and says, you know what, I never knew that you knew that information. I need to talk to you. And that's really, really kind of, I would say, hey, you may not think it applies, but come to the table and you'll benefit greatly from it.
No,
And
excellent.
so to piggyback on that really
Mhm.
fast,
Mhm.
this time around we had a lot of participation from public schools, which we hadn't had in the past. And the pandemic has only highlighted what it looks like if your children are not in school and you're supposed to be dealing with a crisis at the same time. So, people think that they don't have a role to play, but we can come up with a scenario where just about any sector has a role to play.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And best of luck. I say wreaking havoc with the next evil plotting of, but you have to practice and you have to prepare. So thank you so much for sharing and joining us.